So the database is empty right now anyway, so it should be empty.
I actually populated some items in the database because I'm sneaky beforehand, so that when our GET request is made, we'll actually start seeing things populate on that page.
Okay,
so
cool.
I just had a couple of items in
so
there.
You
so you know
socialized
that
with
it's
yourself
working.
a bit on
I did actually. You just see me say hi to myself like a couple of times. I mean, I thought about faking your name in there, but like, I don't know if you'd appreciate that. I don't know. I might have.
It's not creepy if you just do like, hi, Steven, and then if you tweet
hey.
on my behalf.
Great demo, Helen. Oh, thanks. Like, I don't know. I seriously, that might have been my sample data. I'm really sorry. So the next thing we're actually going to talk about is we're going to talk about services. So services in Angular are basically, helper functions for controllers. Because what we talked about before is controllers are, what is basically massaging and bringing that data and putting it in the scope for the view to look at. But if you want to, do a lot of heavyweight requests and stuff, like even to what we just did with the authentication controller and making those requests, we typically want to put those in a service. So services organize the logic, basically, of your code instead of just logic of your code outside of just basically manipulating your models. It'll actually persist data outside of controllers if that's something that you need. So, being able to use this instead of root scope is definitely much better practice. It'll share data between your controllers, and it'll also and you'll also just inject them into your controllers as you need them. So, for instance, if we had an authentication service, we'd only put that in the authentication controller because that's the only one that needs it. So there are a couple of different kinds of services within Angular. There's a factory service, which is something that we're going to use, and that basically, these are a bit complicated as concepts because they're all fairly similar. But basically, you can think of these as being the differences between the services in Angular. A factory will basically return a value to you, and you're going to receive the value that is returned. For service, you'll use that if you want to receive basically a new instance of a created object, so an object that's already created. And provider is versatile because that's sort of the grandfather object that all these other services are based off of. And that's most useful if you have an API that needs to be configured sort of before your app starts running. And if this is all too complicated for you, don't worry. We're just going to start using a factory and not worry about the rest for today.
So if you want to get more detailed information, probably look at the
look at the Angular JS docs because they go into this much, much deeper. But basically, a factory is great for reusing logic, and a service is great for sharing data. A provider is great if you need a lot more functionality or you really want to customize something. I think that's maybe a more succinct way of describing their different use cases. Okay. Another thing I want to discuss is actually resource. So Steven alluded this a couple of times when he was creating that fully RESTful API that we're actually now going to access for our posts. But a resource is basically a really wonderful, very high-level Angular module, actually. Or no, Angular service. Angular module.
Service?
Angular module. It's a module. Angular module that allows you to not have to manually manipulate like HTTP requests like we just did. Instead, it basically, if you give it a fully RESTful endpoint, it'll say, okay, I got this. Like, give me that endpoint, and I'm just going to run whatever methods you need me to when you need me to do them, instead of you having to specify specifically, okay, on GET request for this URL, do this, on success callback, whatever else. It'll just take care of that for you. And we're actually going to see this in practice in a little bit. So first, let's start off with creating a factory to get all of our requests, or no, to get all our posts. So I'm going to put that here, and I'm just going to say app.factory, and I'm going to call this post service. You could also call it post factory, but I like that, post service, postal service. Anyways, don't let me distract you guys with my dorky things. And we're going to pass it that HTTP service because we'll need that to, of course, make our HTTP requests. And in here, we're going to create a variable called factory, and we're going to make it empty for now. And then we're going to create one function here called getAll. That's basically actually going to make those HTTP calls. And I also want, so we're going to make the HTTP call within this function. So we're going to pass this post service basically to our main controller to get stuff, or to get the posts, but we're going to define all its functions in here. So in here, we're just going to then make our HTTP call, say HTTP get, and then the endpoint is API/posts, right? And I think that's it. So we're just going to pass it basically the post here.
Yeah, it should just be a get. As long as you're authenticated, it'll work.
And then in here, because we're going to use this post service, we're actually going to add the post service as a dependency. So we're going to leave this as being set to blank for now, because we want this to actually run independently of that. And we're going to set this to, we're going to, first of all, make a call to that post service. So we'll do post to the post service.getAll. So we'll do post service.getAll. And then because, oh, and I need to return the factory here. So in here, we're basically going, once we make this call, we're going to get a success, we're going to want to wait for its success callback.
Hold on, is the post service factory, is that accessible from any controller?
It's accessible from any controller as long as you include it as a dependency.
Okay.
So that's the beauty of these services, right? Is that you can use them in whatever controller that you need. Okay, so I'm actually going to do get all success data. And so basically, if this call that we're making is correct, we're going to set our scope.post to the data that it returned back. So if this seems a little bit more convoluted to you, I understand. And I want to explain that a little bit. We're basically doing this so that all of this is abstracted away. So if we needed posts, for instance, on another page, or something, we can reuse that code quite easily. And also, you know, if we wanted to, for instance, change the API endpoint, we don't have to go around changing that everywhere in our app. So we'll save this and see if it works. It does not.
JS debugger.
Yep. Cannot read property success of undefined. I'm probably calling that wrong.
Or if it's undefined, that means getAll is returning undefined.
GetAll is returning undefined. Your post service.getAll success function. GetAll success function data.
Post.
Yeah, because this is the same as that, and
Include a post service.
base URL factory that GetAll return. Oh,
That's
not what I did. I did not actually return this, so I'm just giving.
Oh,
I'm just passing it like a blank thing.
Yeah.
Whew, okay, now this should work.
There we go.
Awesome. Okay, so because we already had some data saved in our MongoDB, yeah. See, now it's actually making that call to our server and is returning back the posts that we have. So that's awesome. We can see the posts that we have, but our posts mechanism still, I mean, I keep doing that. I keep typing my last name as the message that I want to send. It'll add it in here, as you can see, but when we refresh the page, it actually, doesn't show up. And that's because we're still saving that. We're adding that to the posts that we have here, but we're not sending that out anywhere. Oh, I actually want to make one last change here. Instead of having you type in your name here, let's actually
logged in.
Yeah, since you're already logged in, let's actually go ahead and show your screen name. So because that's in our main partial, we're actually going to change that here. And instead of having you type in your name, I'm just going to do a tiny heading. It'll be the current user. It's going to say, oh, current user says.
Says?
Says, yeah, thank you. Grammar. Not my strong suit. And now we actually want to manipulate our posts here. So before we do that, I want to go back and talk about the ng resource that we briefly touched on. So instead of actually having to go through and implement all of these for every single or implement another function in our factory for every single request that we're going to make, why don't we just use that ng resource? And we can actually do that really easily. It's only one line, but we need to first import that ng resource module in, similar to the way that we did that for ng route, because that's also not something that comes standard packaged with Angular. So I have the link in here somewhere, and we're going to just add that into our index.html. Save that, and also add that into our Angular module as a dependency for the entire app. This should be a comma. Okay, and now instead of having this quite complicated factory here, we are going to just be able to delete all of that. Good exercise, though, so you guys know how it works, even though I basically typed it in and deleted it right after. And we're going to use one really simple line that I always happen to get wrong, and really actually simple line. It's surprising I get that wrong so often. And we're basically going to return it a resource that's generated by the resource module. And what it's going to do is it's going to take that entire endpoint that we have, complete with the ID, and it's going to create all these helper functions that you'll be able to use in whatever controller that you included in. So now, first of all, instead of using the get all request that we just made, since we deleted that, we don't even need a success function, actually. All we need to do is say, hey, make scope.posts into the post serve, and set that equal to the post service.query, set that to what the return is from post service.query. And what query will basically, just send a get request to the API/posts and get all of our cheaps, right?
Yeah, because it knows it's a resource. It could just say, hey, it's doing the get all.
Yeah, exactly. So now let's refresh the page and see if that works. It does not. What is wrong? Resource is not defined. That's because I defined HTTP up here, but I really just need...
You just need resource, right?
Resource. Yeah. And so right now, we actually need to probably hide this if the user's not authenticated. I'm going to do that next.
Yeah, you probably want to do that.
But you can see that the ng resource is working. By just using that tiny query line, we've managed to be able to get all our entire feed. So let's go and hide this forum. We'll again use ng show. We'll only show the posting form if the user is authenticated. But we'll of course leave the post stream so that anyone can access that. Awesome. And now actually let's log in and make sure that works. Yep, it does. And so now when you're logged in, this...
It should be zero.
Yeah, it's showing up.
That'd be nice, too.
It's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's actually go and work on our last little bit, work on being able to post to our chirp stream. Cheap stream.
Cheap stream.
Cheap stream. Yeah. Tweet, cheap. Yeah. If we're going for a one-to-one mapping, that works.
I figured everybody's already caught on to that, right?
So let's actually go and change our post. So if you recall in our main, when the post form is submitted, it's actually still going to call that post. Yeah, it's still going to call that post function, and we'll leave that post function to itself right here. But the only difference is that we'll actually use the resource to go ahead and add something to it. So all we're going to do is we're going to say post service, and we're going to use the save function to be able to save that new post in.
So it'll secretly, like under the covers, call the API that we need to.
Yeah.
Because we did a RESTful implementation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
On the back end.
So since we have, how do I say this? Okay, since we are using our current user instead of actually having someone type in their name, why don't we set the created by to actually the current user? So let's do that first before we call anything. We're going to call scope. We're going to say scope.new post.created by. We're going to set that to the root scope dot current user. We want to make sure to actually add the root scope in here as a dependency. And next, we want to set that created at.
There's that tense error again.
Yeah, we want to set the created at to the current time. So we're going to set created at to date.now. Okay, and so now that we've set up new post, we can actually go in and save it. We're going to save scope.newPost. And we're going to give this a success function as well. I spelled success wrong. And so what we want to do here, we basically want to say, well, after we've done this, first of all, we want to make sure that we clear new post again so that it's ready for another cheap. So we want to do that. And we also, of course, want to actually refresh the entire cheap stream. So we'll just go ahead and call that query again. And because of that two-way data binding, it's just going to refresh. It's just going to augment the view as we need it.
Okay.
So I'll save this, and I'll run this again. You might have noticed that when we refresh the page, we actually log ourselves out. And that's because we haven't implemented sessions on the client side. But once we log in, OK, so I'll say something here. Is it because I already said hi? No, I don't think so. Inspect element. Undefined is not a function. Scope.post.
Scope.post, yeah. So scope is undefined.
Oh, where did I? Post service, scope.post. Am I creating this wrong? Good question, Helen. What was the right way for me to do it? I asked my former self. Oh, yeah. OK. OK, I see what I did. So you want to actually pass that callback in instead of doing what I did, which is calling a success. I can't find where I put in the code. OK.
That's success right there.
Yeah. And so I want to make sure that I have my indentation correct. OK, awesome. I'll save this, and I will.
It's probably refresh, right?
Yeah. I was kind of hoping that I didn't have to,
Yeah, I think it loads up all those views already, so.
OK.
Say something.
I'll say something else. OK, awesome. So now that actually worked. I said one more time, and it chirped successfully, I guess. And now it's displaying in our chirp feed once again. So now that we're done with this, we've pretty much implemented all of, I think, our necessary parts. We've managed to interact with that REST API that we created in past modules to be able to authenticate our users, register new users, sign out our users, and we're also able to both get we're able to get all of our cheaps through that GET request on posts, and we're also able to write posts to it. Now, you can extend this a lot more because, again, that endpoint will allow you to access individual cheaps. It'll allow you to update them and delete them if necessary. But I think we're just going to leave this for now.
Awesome. So we've created all the basics that we need for the whole application. We're actually got it running locally. So in the next module, what we'll have, I will go ahead and figure out how to take this thing, deploy it to the cloud so that everybody in the world can cheap together.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. All right, cool. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes, and we'll show you how to get this deployment working and talk about a couple other mean stack tools, and then we'll wrap this MVA up. See you soon.